So, think back to 2004. If you were the person designing your phone's music player back then, your title was probably engineer.
Yeah, UI engineer usually.
Right. But today, if you look for the person doing that exact same job, they're called something like a full stack product visionary or something equally intense.
Oh, absolutely. The titles have just completely exploded.
And it makes you wonder, right? Did human evolution suddenly just spawn an entirely new species of tech worker? Or did the corporate vocabulary just get an extraordinarily expensive upgrade?
I mean, it is a very seductive assumption. We are fundamentally wired to believe that new words mean new things.
Exactly. You scroll through job postings and it's like, you need a translator.
Yeah, when the vocabulary evolves, we just assume the daily grind, like the actual physics of the job, must have evolved right alongside it. It's how we make sense of a really complex, fast-moving industry.
But when you actually peek behind the curtain of the digital design industry, the reality is a lot murkier.
Oh, much murkier.
Today, our deep dive is guided by this really compelling piece, written in December 2025 by Tobias Reidenhag. He's the head of design at Intunio, which is a Swedish UX and development studio.
And he took a really fascinating look back over his own two-decade career to map out this exact phenomenon.
Yeah, so the mission for us today is to trace 20 years of digital design history to uncover a pretty surprising truth. Basically, while the job titles are in this constant, chaotic state of flux, the actual work has remained remarkably stable.
And, this goes far beyond just a nostalgic history lesson about old cell phones.
Right. It's not just tech history.
No, not at all. If we look at the underlying mechanics here, it is really an exploration of corporate economics and organizational psychology. Job titles are essentially a form of internal currency.
Wait, currency? Like to buy influence?
Kind of, yeah. Titles change when organizations grow and need to secure new hiring budgets, or they change when middle management needs to legitimize a new perspective to the boardroom.
Oh, I see. Like it's much easier to get budget approval for a newly invented product strategist than to ask the CFO for, a 10th UI engineer.
Exactly. But that linguistic shift happens even when the core responsibility of the human being doing the work hasn't changed at all.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why these design titles are so fluid, we can't really start in the boardroom, right?
Right, we have to start with how the people doing the work are actually trained.
Yeah, and Tobias points out this foundational tension that's just baked into the design profession from day one. He uses his own educational background in Sweden as the perfect case study.
It really is a great example,
He started out at a school in Skövde studying cognitive science.
which provides a very specific, deeply analytical lens.
Yeah.
Tobias describes this era of his education as building a foundational understanding of human perception and behavior.
Right, he was reading Don Norman's classic book, The Design of Everyday Things.
Yeah, and they were running user studies and conducting heuristic evaluations on existing software.
Wait, heuristic evaluations? That's essentially just a fancy term for running a product against a recognized checklist of design rules, right?
That is exactly the mechanism, yeah.
Like making sure there's always an undo button or ensuring the system status is always visible to the user.
Precisely. You take established psychological principles
Yeah.
and you grade an interface against them. It is highly analytical diagnostic work. You are observing and measuring.
But Tobias noticed a massive blind spot in that program. The focus was entirely on analyzing existing solutions.
Right, it was all about finding the flaws.
Yeah. He felt like the program was preparing him to be a usability engineer,
Wow.
somebody who could point out all the issues and document all the user needs, but who had absolutely no idea how to actually shape a new solution from scratch.
It's the classic dilemma.
I mean, it's the difference between being a food critic and being a chef.
Oh, I love that analogy. Because the critic tastes the soup, analyzes the flavor profile, identifies that, say, the acidity is overpowering the broth, and tells the kitchen, hey, this needs more salt.
Right. It's vital work. The problem is identified.
But the critic doesn't know how to balance the heat of the stove or the timing of the ingredients.
Exactly. The cognitive science approach was creating these brilliant food critics. But then the following year, Tobias transitions to the interaction design program at Chalmers University.
And suddenly he's thrown into the kitchen.
Yeah. At Chalmers, the primary directive was creation. The expectation wasn't just to observe, it was to build, to test, and to iterate.
Which is a huge mental shift.
Did they still do research?
Yes.
But in this environment, research was treated as a support mechanism for the design process. It wasn't the ultimate end goal itself.
Right. You actually had to get behind the stove, chop the onions, and cook the soup yourself.
And Tobias argues that this exact tension, this constant agonizing push and pull between analyzing what is wrong, like the critic, and creating what is new, like the chef, it's haunted the user experience role ever since.
It really is the fundamental identity crisis of the profession. Like,
Yeah.
are we here to diagnose the problem, or are we here to build the solution?
So let's take that chef mentality, that drive to actually build the thing, and follow Tobias into the real world. Think back to the mid-2000s. We are traveling back to the year 2004.
Which is a landscape that is almost alien compared to today.
Oh, totally. No iPhones, no massive glass touchscreens. Tobias starts working at Sony Ericsson.
He's in a design team of about 10 to 15 people, and they have end-to-end responsibility for specific applications on the phones.
Yeah, and Tobias lands the media application, so the music and video players. This is the exact moment when MP3 files are just starting to hit mobile devices.
A huge technological leap at the time.
And his official job title, UI engineer.
Which makes sense when you consider the constraints of a device from 2004. You had a tiny screen, physical numeric keypads, a directional D-pad, and soft keys.
Okay, just to clarify for anyone who hasn't held a phone from that era in a while, soft keys are those blank physical buttons sitting right under the screen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where the function of the button changes depending on whatever text is displayed on the screen right above it. Like in one menu, it means select, and in another menu, it means delete.
Precisely. Now imagine trying to design a system to organize, search, and play a library of 500 MP3s using only a directional pad and 2 soft keys.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It was incredibly complex. You can't just swipe or tap on a search bar. You have to mathematically prioritize actions.
Wow.
You have to map out these incredibly deep branching navigation trees. You have to literally count the exact number of physical clicks it takes to perform a task to ensure the user doesn't just give up out of frustration.
Which is fascinating, but I still have to push back on that job title, UI engineer.
You don't like it?
It sounds incredibly rigid for a design role. If he's the guy deciding how a human being experiences their favorite music, calling him an engineer feels so strange.
I could see that.
It's almost like calling a portrait artist a paint technician. It completely strips the empathy and the creativity out of the title.
Well, it strips out the romance, certainly. But the title was highly accurate for the reality of the work.
Really? How so?
At that time, design and implementation were inextricably connected. You couldn't just draw a pretty picture of an interface in a design tool and hand it to a developer.
Right, because of the hardware constraints?
Exactly. Navigating those severe constraints required engineering logic applied to user flow. The architecture of the interface basically was the design.
And he mentions they were still doing deep, empathetic user research alongside that engineering logic.
Oh, absolutely.
They ran classic usability studies with lab observations. He talks about product managers and developers standing behind two-way glass, observing live as users tried to navigate these clunky phones.
Which is classic UX research.
Yeah, they even did live phone interviews with users out in the wild during the launch of the very first Walkman phones. So the responsibility was heavily user-centered, even if the title was technical.
But what is incredibly telling about this specific era is how compartmentalized the visual aspect of the job was.
Oh, right.
Tobias notes that he spent all his time shaping the interaction patterns, the structural efficiency, the click paths, the actual visual polish, the glossy icons, the exact color palettes, the typography. That was handed off later to a completely separate group.
Called the Creative Design Center, right?
Yes, exactly.
So the UI engineer figures out the structural integrity of the house, builds the walls, puts in the plumbing, and then hires someone else to come in and paint it.
That compartmentalization is key. Because if the UI engineer era was all about making the physical buttons work and structuring the logic, the next major evolution in the industry was about how organizations communicated the value of that structural work to the broader business.
Which brings us to a massive shift. Around 2006, 2007, the title UX designer, user experience designer, really starts to gain serious traction across the industry.
It was everywhere.
And Tobias makes a critical observation here. Becoming a UX designer represented a title change, but it did not represent a new role.
Right. The actual daily tasks remain the same.
Exactly. The day-to-day work, the structural mapping, the flows, determining the interactions, that work didn't change much at all.
The environment around the work changed. UX became an umbrella term, basically a highly effective strategic rebrand.
A rebrand for who, though?
Well, think about how corporate hierarchies function. If your title is UI engineer, You are perceived as a mechanic.
You fix the buttons.
Exactly. You belong in the basement with the developers. But if your title is user experience designer, suddenly you are advocating for the holistic journey of the customer.
Oh, I see. You are speaking a language that the C-suite cares about.
Exactly. It made it significantly easier for design leaders to secure larger budgets, hire bigger teams, and claim a seat at the executive table.
So the vocabulary scales up to meet the boardroom. And speaking of scaling up, Tobias's time at BlackBerry is a fascinating case study in how these roles actually play out when you inject them into a massive global organization.
BlackBerry was huge at this point.
Yeah, he gets to BlackBerry, and the core design role is still really broad. But BlackBerry tried something completely different. They utilized this explicit buddy system for their
This is
teams.
a very unique approach.
They literally paired one UX designer with one UX researcher, a strict, permanent one-to-one marriage.
The researcher handles the prep, the testing, the synthesis of the insights. They are the ultimate food critic.
And the designer takes that foundation and focuses purely on shaping the solution, the chef.
On paper, the buddy system sounds like the gold standard of user-centered design.
Mm.
I mean, every single product decision is backed by a dedicated researcher.
But wait, if pairing them one-to-one sounds like the ultimate dream team, why did BlackBerry kill this system after just 1 year? Was it just too expensive to have two highly paid people constantly tethered together for every tiny feature update?
It wasn't just the financial cost, it was the operational bottleneck. Think about the actual workflow of these two distinct disciplines.
Mhm.
If a researcher needs to take 3 weeks to run a deep, foundational study on how enterprise users organize their secure emails, what is the designer doing for those 3 weeks?
Just sitting there waiting for the report.
Exactly.
Oh.
And conversely, if a designer is spending 2 weeks tweaking the visual hierarchy of a settings menu with the development team, what is the researcher doing?
They are completely out of sync. The chef is standing around the kitchen waiting for the critic to finish writing the review.
Exactly the problem. Decoupling them was a sign of organizational maturity.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't a failure, it was an evolution.
Right. By moving away from fixed pairs and toward a flexible situational collaboration, BlackBerry unlocked both roles.
So they weren't tied at the hip anymore.
UX design and UX research remained clearly defined, separate competencies. But now, a researcher could be deployed to do deep, generative research for a product launching next year, while the designer could work closely with engineering to ship today's update.
It allowed the insights to scale where they delivered the most value without stalling the daily machinery of building the product.
Yes, it's all about resource allocation.
So we've gone from the highly technical UI engineer in the trenches to the strategic umbrella of the UX designer claiming a seat in the boardroom.
But once design was sitting at that executive table, the executives started asking about ROI.
Naturally, they always want to know about the return on investment.
They started asking about metrics.
Hmm.
Suddenly, just making things, user-friendly wasn't enough to justify the massive design budgets.
The business needed design to explicitly drive revenue.
Exactly. Which births the next massive corporate rebrand, right around 2016, 2017, the product designer.
When product designer began dominating job boards, the industry press treated it like a completely new breed of professional, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. The narrative was that a product designer seamlessly combined UX research, interface design, and most importantly, an explicit responsibility for the product's business outcomes.
So a product designer wasn't just an advocate for the user, they were a business strategist responsible for prioritization, making difficult feature trade-offs and ensuring the interface actively moved the needle on company revenue.
Which sounds incredibly impressive on a LinkedIn profile.
It really does. But Tobias delivers this fantastic punchline. He says that when this title started appearing everywhere, experienced designers simply looked at it and recognized themselves.
Because this wasn't a new profession at all.
Right. Veteran designers like Tobias and his team back at BlackBerry had already been doing this exact work for a decade. I mean, you can't design a successful music app without understanding the business constraints of licensing or storage.
They had always been operating at that chaotic intersection of user needs, technical constraints, and business realities.
So the timing of the product designer rebrand, it wasn't random, was it?
No, it perfectly mirrors the explosion of complex platform companies, your Ubers, Airbnbs, and Spotifys.
Right, where the app is the product.
Exactly. In these companies, the digital interface wasn't just a wrapper for a physical product. The interface was the entire business.
They needed a job title that signaled to investors and internal stakeholders that the design team was operating with absolute business rigor.
And product designer became the fashionable way to articulate that. But Tobias is absolute. In his assessment, it did not fundamentally change the daily physics of what experienced designers were already doing.
So it sounds like the industry just took the veteran UX designers who had naturally learned how to talk to the finance and engineering teams over the years and slapped a product label on them to justify a higher salary band and a broader mandate.
That is a cynical yet highly accurate translation of the phenomenon.
Well, someone has to say it.
And the danger Tobias warns about only arises when companies start treating these fluid, culturally driven titles as if they are precise scientific specifications.
Right. The chaos happens when HR departments or hiring managers treat a UX designer and a product designer as two entirely different species of employee.
They filter resumes based on a keyword, rather than looking at what the person actually did.
Yeah, and when an organization fails to understand that these titles are merely approximate descriptions of a remarkably stable set of responsibilities, they build deeply dysfunctional teams.
They hire people based on trendy vocabulary rather than actual capability.
And I think that is the most crucial takeaway for you listening right now. Whether you are actively applying for jobs and trying to decode a career page, whether you are a founder trying to hire your very first design team, or you're just trying to understand how this massive tech industry actually operates underneath the PR spin.
You have to ruthlessly ignore the trendy vocabulary.
Exactly. Don't get caught up in whether a resume says interaction designer or UI engineer or product visionary. Look at the mechanics of their past work. Focus on the actual capabilities required to get the job done.
Are they skilled at analyzing the problem? Are they capable of shaping the solution?
Can they navigate the constraints of your specific business? Because as Tobias so perfectly summarizes 20 years of history, digital design changes names. The work remains.
The work has indeed remained. But, if we trace this history forward to this exact moment, it raises a deeply provocative question.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we have spent 2 decades watching the corporate vocabulary change for human designers, while the core mechanics of analyzing problems and creating solutions stayed the same.
Right, the critic and the chef.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today, we are entering an era where generative AI tools can instantly structure user flows, map out navigation trees, and output high-fidelity visual interfaces in a matter of seconds.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. For the first time, the mechanics of creation are fundamentally shifting. So will the next title change finally represent an actual mutation in the work itself?
Wow.
If an AI can instantly whip up the interface on command, who exactly in the future will be the critic analyzing the design, and who will be the chef actually creating it?